He told her, first of all, according to her friend, now this is secondhand testimony, that she had to purchase a casket to transport the body from the residence where he died to the funeral home. Well, that's
not true.
It's illegal to tell her that.
I think it was nearly $15,000 by the time she was done, and it just felt unnecessary.
My family's completely incapable of planning anything. They're dear people, but they simply are not planners. And they rely far more on emotion than they ever do on reason. And they will simply come unglued, whichever of them is left when I die. And if I haven't planned it, it's not going to be planned.
People who cannot ask questions are often victims. And therefore, one of the things that
comes about reflects the fact that many of us never thought about it or never did anything about it. The way it usually comes about is that most deaths take place in hospitals or nursing homes. So when death does occur, the surviving family, often unfamiliar with what happens next and stricken with shock and grief, calls up a funeral home, often getting the number out of the yellow pages, and says, "Help us." The home is glad to help them. That's their business. They arrange for the body to be transported to the funeral home and set up an appointment for the survivors to come to the mortuary to make the necessary arrangements. What happens then is that the survivors are the object of carefully planned merchandising. The funeral industry, increasingly dominated by large corporations, is an industry like any other, with trade associations, industry magazines, and a marketing focus.
You certainly can't blame the mortician for wanting to make money, but the reality is that the selling is done when the customer is probably more vulnerable and less critical than is true of almost any other business.
In that moment, the possible hopes of the deceased and even of the survivors for a service of dignity, simplicity, and economy may be forgotten or swept aside. Grief and guilt and concern to glorify the reputation of the deceased leads many survivors to go for an expensive casket, thousands of dollars worth of flowers and musicians, funeral processions, elaborate services, and embalming and cosmetic processes for the corpse. The death of a family member is a most stressful time, and many people are uncertain what to do. In the absence of a clear expression of the wishes of the deceased, they may be vulnerable to salespeople who justify their efforts as grief therapy. Presumably, the more expensive, the more therapeutic their offerings will be. There are always people who feel they must spend a lot to keep up appearances, so they may not be shocked when the bills amount to many thousands of dollars. But if you're not anxious to have your heirs use your estate for expensive funeral arrangements or go into debt to give you a lavish funeral, and if you'd rather not subject your family to salespeople at a time like that, the alternative is to join People's Memorial Association, frequently referred to simply as PMA. For a small, one-time enrollment charge, your wishes for how you want to be dealt with after your death are kept on file at the funeral home with which PMA has an arrangement. Survivors are instructed by this document, kept among your key papers as well, to call that funeral home and to mention your PMA membership, and the proceedings thereafter are run smoothly because the home has your choices on file and at much lower cost to your family. And they are decent and dignified proceedings, with all the reverence, dignity, and compassion you would expect for yourself and your loved ones.
I mean, it was incredible. We just called, at the nursing home, called, and we didn't have to do a thing. That's all there was to it.
And I was extremely impressed with the sensitivity, the care, the manner in which we were treated.
It was mainly the kindness and the dignity and the attention to details that I really appreciated.
The home has agreed with PMA to guarantee reasonable prices for its services in return for the opportunity to serve the association's very large membership without costly marketing. Many memorial associations emphasize cremation. Here in Western Washington, most members of People's Memorial Association voluntarily do choose cremation, but many other options are available.
If you want more elaborate ceremonies or containers or that, they're certainly available, but no one in any way tried to even suggest more than what my mother had stated she wanted on her written forms she'd completed about 5 years previously.
When I went down to make whatever final arrangements needed to be made, they offered to help me write an obituary and that sort of thing, and didn't try to sell me anything at all. I even had to ask them if there were urns. Not that I wanted an urn, but I was curious.
No matter what services you select from the wide variety of services available, you will be charged only for the ones you use, and the cost will be lower than elsewhere because you had the forethought to join People's Memorial Association. Further, People's Memorial Association constantly surveys families that recently used the services of the funeral home to be certain that members receive excellent service and that all went as it should have. People's Memorial Association serves Western Washington from Chehalis to Blaine. Our service agreement has long been with the Blight's Funeral Home, one of the oldest in the city. In 1939, James Blight's saw the value of such an arrangement. He was severely criticized by other morticians at the time, but he stuck with it and 20 years later still spoke with pride of his decision to do so.
They tried to put a bill through the state legislature whereby this type of association would be outlawed. No, couldn't outlaw them because there were lots of other co-ops around. The co-ops were strong. Because looking back now, you see how asinine it really was when all these things. And if they thought some little organization like ours was going to overthrow the funeral industry, well, you knew it had to be the most laughable thing that there ever was.
The Blight's Funeral Home, located here at the outlet of Lake Union, is now owned by a large corporation with many funeral homes in the West. And they have substantially refurbished and re-equipped it, but they still gladly renew their arrangement with People's Memorial. In fact, the buyer made a continued good relationship with PMA a condition of its purchase of the home. People's Memorial Association has grown at a fairly constant rate since 1965 and had enrolled over 100,000 members in 1994. In spite of its low profile, it is the oldest and largest non-profit memorial association in the United States. The number of PMA members served by the Blight's Funeral Home continues to grow also. In 1993, there were 1,720 final arrangements made through PMA.
One of the benefits is price, a funeral for hundreds rather than thousands of dollars. Members of People's Memorial Association tend to be practical people who are interested in simple, dignified, unostentatious, and economical funerals rather than an elaborate funeral with caskets and all of the other expensive items. They really much prefer that their estate go to the benefit of their heirs rather than to enrich the profit margin of the funeral home.
And I just couldn't see, and my family also couldn't see putting thousands of dollars into a elaborate wooden box that would go into the earth.
They take you through the first batch that cost, $4,000 or $5,000 each.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, this is not quite what I'm wanting. I can remember with my father, when we finally got down to one we could afford.
It was quite a bit less.
Well, they said, well, that's the ones we use for the paupers. And we said, that's one that Dad would approve of.
I think that was
because he didn't want to spend any money on getting buried. And so that's the way we went. And, actually, we felt we had achieved something there.
Well, my parents were concerned about honesty in dealing with people, that they not be taken advantage of particularly in a time of stress.
But what appeals to most members even more is the fact that membership lets them plan their death treatment and make their wishes clear so as to save their loved ones much of the pain, embarrassment, possible acrimony, and waste attendant upon having to go out at the worst time and purchase a funeral, the one product for which almost no one ever comparison shops. Through People's Memorial Association, members make arrangements long before the need arises, frequently when they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s, without prepayment to a funeral home or making costly commitments. They find great satisfaction, often for decades, in knowing that they have eased their loved ones' burdens.
When my husband and I joined the People's Memorial Association, part of that process for us was having the children around and discussing with them that this is something that will happen in our lives, and that it saddens us that we will have to make them sad at some point. But part of that sadness will not be a lack of clarity about what we want, and neither will we leave them vulnerable to the kind of financial gouging that I saw my sister-in-law experience.
Funeral planning is a responsibility, just like making a will, setting up a living will, designating a health care proxy. We at People's Memorial Association call it putting your house in order. It's very comforting and reassuring to put your house in order, and it's a very worthwhile gift to your family. But it won't happen unless you do it.
Hi, I'm Ernie Mariner, past president of the Maine Memorial Society. This video explains what memorial societies do. Let me tell you about our Maine Society. Our one-time membership fee of $25 per person pays for an initial packet of useful information and forms, a membership card, a semi-annual newsletter, a free inquiry service, and special arrangements with cooperating funeral directors who provide simple, dignified, inexpensive services for our members. To become a member, write to Memorial Society of Maine, P.O. Box 3122, Auburn, Maine, 04212-3122, or call us at 786-4323.